buddy told me he couldn't sing a special. His voice is not doing very well. I said, "You want me to sing a special?" Oh boy, it would be special. I'll tell you. I don't know in what sense, but turn, if you would, to the Gospel of Mark, chapter 13. We want to do, I trust, a concluding message here on this chapter. I've entitled this, "Christ Coming, Sign or No Sign." Mark chapter 13, Gospel of Mark chapter 13, sign or no sign. Now let me say this. If you read Luke 21, Matthew 24, and Mark 13, it's hard, to be truthful, to reconcile all of those things. And so it's with humility that I preach what I'm presenting to you, because there are some aspects of those prophecies where the question is he talking about the coming to destroy Jerusalem, or is he talking about the second coming? There are some that have what's called a foreshadowing view, much like in the first coming. The Bible said that Jesus was coming in the Old Testament, but when he got here, it unfolded that he's coming again. You know, it emphasized the first coming, but then we see there's a space to the second coming. So there are a couple of verses that could be applied to the destruction of Jerusalem and also have meaning to the second coming. And, before I even read our text, just to introduce us, go to Isaiah 13. And let me just introduce something to you, and I hope we're going to the right chapter because I don't even have this down, but I'm just trying to give you, I'm just more or less teaching today than preaching. So look at Isaiah 13, and this is clearly a prophecy of the destruction of Babylon that was fulfilled. The nation of Babylon was destroyed by the Persians and overtaken. So what we're reading is prophetic language of the destruction of Babylon, and it was fulfilled. But why I've turned here is I want you to see the language that is used. And this is the language that the people and the Jews understood. They understood the way God speaks. You find that it's going to talk about the disturbance of the heavens. To a Hebrew, there was a continuity. In other words, here's what I'm trying to explain. If you throw a rock into a pond, the whole pond, it ripples out. Their idea of time and space is kind of more connected than what we have. So if some disturbance is on this earth, it ripples out into the heavens. You see what I'm saying? That's their thinking. So if you describe the disturbances of the heavens, it's because there's been a disturbance on the earth. And so this is the poetic language that is used. Now, in the end time, there is such a disturbance that there is a real cataclysmic shaking of the heavens. But before that time, it is somewhat symbolic. And so look with me in Isaiah 13. And verse 1, "The burden of Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amoz did see. Lift ye up a banner upon the high mountain, exalt the voice unto them, shake the hand, that they may go into the gates of the nobles. I have commanded my sanctified ones, I have also called my mighty ones, for mine anger, even them that rejoice in my highness. The noise of a multitude in the mountains, like as of a great people, a tumultuous noise of the kingdoms of nations gathered together. The Lord of hosts mustereth the host of the battle. They come from a far country, from the end of heaven, even the Lord, and the weapons of his indignation to destroy the whole land. Howl ye, for the day of the Lord is at hand. It shall come as a destruction from the Almighty. Therefore shall all hands be faint, and every man's heart shall melt. and they shall be afraid. Pangs and sorrow shall take hold of them. They shall be in pain as a woman that travaileth. They shall be amazed one at another. Their faces shall be as flames. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, cruel, both with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he shall destroy the sinners thereof out of it. Now look at this. For the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine. And I will punish the world for their evil, and the wicked for their iniquity, and I will cause the arrogancy of the proud to cease, and will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. Now, as you keep going down, he's not talking about the final judgment upon the world, because if we took time to keep reading, go to verse 17. He said, Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver, and as for gold, they shall not delight in it. It was the Medes and the Persians. Verse 18, Their bows also shall dash the young men to pieces, and they shall have no pity on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes shall not spare children. And Babylon, the glory of the kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees, the excellency shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, you heard that language in verse 10, but he's describing the destruction of Babylon. But he uses this apocalyptic type of language. We find some of that in the New Testament, and it seems to be applying to the destruction of Jerusalem. Remember when Peter preached, he said the moon will turn to blood and this and that before the great and notable day of the Lord, and it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call in the name of the Lord shall be saved. Well, that's now. He's talking about the movement or the judgment of Israel. And now we are in the time of the Gentiles. So it's pictured as this cataclysmic event, which is also what is used for, of course, the end of the world. But in that sense, we have more of a reality than just apocalyptic language. But turn with me back now to Mark chapter 13, and we'll begin at verse 24 and try to teach you concerning our Lord's teaching in Mark 13. So the Gospel of Mark chapter 13 and beginning at verse 24. But in those days, after that tribulation, now he's talking about the tribulation upon the destruction of Jerusalem. And here we see this language. The sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light. The stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken. Then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then shall he send his angels, and shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from the uttermost part of the earth to the uttermost part of heaven. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When her branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So ye, in like manner, when ye shall see these things come to pass, know that it is nigh, even at the doors. Verily, I say unto you that this generation shall not pass till all these things be done. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away. But of that day and that hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels which are in heaven, neither the Son of Man, but the Father. Take ye heed, watch, and pray, for ye know not when the time is. For the Son of Man is as a man taking a far journey, who left his house and gave authority to his servants, and to every man his work, and commanded the porter to watch. Watch ye therefore, for ye know not when the master of the house cometh, at even, or at midnight, or at the cock crowing, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. And what I say unto you, I say unto all, watch. Now, congregation, the New Testament is emphatically clear that Jesus is coming again the second time. His first coming, he came personally and visibly. Likewise, we find in his second coming, he will come personally and visibly, but in his second coming, he will come in judgment and in power and in glory. and bring about the consummation of God's work of redemption and the judgment of every man. This is what the Bible teaches concerning the second coming. Now, in Mark 13 and in Matthew 24 and Luke 21, many people are confused because they fail to recognize and understand Jesus' teachings of the power of the judgment of God upon the Jewish nation and the destruction of Jerusalem. And they mix those sayings and teachings with Jesus' teaching of the event concerning his second coming. And so they take things that are directly referring to the destruction of Jerusalem and they apply them to the second coming. And that's where there is some confusion. Now, the best way to discern this, and here's what I give you from my years of study concerning this, here's what I understand. We will show you that concerning the destruction of Jerusalem, that there was a definite sign. There were general characteristics of the age, which are the same in regard to the second coming. But he said these basically are really no signs in a definite sense. This is just the characteristics of the age. Now, like birth pangs, they will intensify, but there is no distinct sign for the second coming. But there is a distinct sign given for the destruction of Jerusalem. So I've entitled this Sign or No Sign. And so in the destruction of Jerusalem, there is a distinct sign. In the second coming, though there are what we might call general signs, there is no distinct sign given in regard to the second coming. Look with us at our text, verse 32. He's telling all these different signs. Matter of fact, go up to verse 14. Let's look at the sign. Verse 14 of Mark 13. But when ye shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not. Now look at this. Let him that readeth understand, then let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains. Now you understand that has no pertaining to today. I mean, is this just talking about Judea? This is talking to the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, Luke was a Gentile. And Luke explains, it says, when you see the armies compass about the city, know that it's the abomination of desolation. God prophesied in Daniel 9 that the culmination of God's judgment upon Israel would be when they filled up their sin. The last sin was the crucifixion of Christ himself. Remember, he said, you killed the prophets, and last of all, I'll send my son. But what did they do? They said, he is the heir. Let's kill him and get the vineyard. And in one of the parables said, what shall the king do? And it's a parable of Jesus. He shall destroy their city and those wicked men. And this was the judgment. In Luke, it's called the days of vengeance. In Thessalonians, it said, wrath has come upon them to the uttermost. It was a specific judgment upon the nation Israel. Now, those that heard, and I'm just giving you a general overview, those that heard Christ and knew this sign were delivered. And I'll tell you why. A general called Vespasian came in about 67, 68 AD. He surrounded Jerusalem. He was going to destroy Jerusalem. But the emperor died. They called him back to Rome to make him emperor. So he just up and left. Now guess what all of the Christians did that heard the words of Christ? They fled to the mountains. Now when there's an army around, you don't flee to the mountains. You flee to the city. The city's where you got food. The city's where you have protection. But he said, don't flee to the city. Flee to the mountains. And Eusebius, a historian of the 300s, records how they fled to Perea, to a place called Pella, and they were not destroyed in the destruction of the Roman army that then came, which was Vespasian's son Titus, came in 70 AD, and there was no mercy. and he completely destroyed Jerusalem, 1,100,000 killed, turned over all the stones, completely tore the temple down. And that's what the question was. Remember that? Look at chapter 13. Look at the first verse. Let's see what was actually asked. 13:1. And as he went out of the temple, one of the disciples saith unto him, Master, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. They're looking at the temple, okay, which had been, it was the refurbishing of Zerubbabel's temple. Herod had been building on it, 46 years or something like that, 43 years. And Jesus answering said unto him, Seest thou these great buildings? There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives over against the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately. Now listen to the question. What is he talking about? The destruction of the temple. Doesn't he mention anything about the second coming here? Did he say anything about the second coming? He just mentioned the temple being destroyed. Their question in verse 4, tell us, when shall these things be? What? When the temple will not have one stone left upon another. And what shall be the sign when all these things shall be fulfilled? So that's the primary answer Jesus is giving. Now, in way of contrast, he then ends the chapter talking about his second coming. And here is the contrast. Once again, go look at verse 14, which was the specific sign. And when you shall see the abomination of desolation, and Luke's account says, when you see the armies compass about the city. That's in Luke 21. He said, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not. You see, these were the unclean Roman armies that were going to destroy the temple. He says, when you see these, he says, standing where it ought not, let him that readeth understand, let them that be in Judea flee to the mountains. Now that's a sign. I mean, it's a real easy, discernible sign. It's a literal sign. It's a distinct sign. It's a clear sign. When you see these armies, okay? Now some of you may not be persuaded in what I'm saying, so go to Luke 21 so you understand what I'm saying. Luke 21 and verse 20. Luke 21 and verse 20. He's dealing with the same thing, people, the same subject. Luke 21 and verse 20. And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereunto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people in the land of Judea, the people of Israel. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. See, we're in the time of the Gentiles. God had worked with the nation Israel, but he was stopping that work, and the end of the nation of Israel as a theocracy was coming. He judged them, he punished them, he poured out vengeance upon them, such as never had been poured out upon them. You know, like we just read about how when Babylon destroyed them and so forth, but greater than that destruction. And some 90,000 went captive, Josephus said, into other countries. When you see this, you know the desolation there is nigh. Because Jesus said, behold, your house is left to you desolate, God forsaken. Go with me and look at Matthew 23. Look what he said, and this is what I was sharing with Tony. you have to understand the uniqueness of this particular generation. The book of Daniel chapter 9 says that they would finish the transgression. I don't know if any of you remember reading in Acts 16. God told Abraham that his descendants would be in bondage for 400 years. He said, because I'm going to judge the Amorites, but their sin is not yet full. The Amorites were the inhabitants of Canaan, but God was waiting until the consummation of their sins was full. This is the generation in which the Israel fulfilled all their ultimate culmination of sin because they rejected the Messiah. So this particular generation to whom Jesus is speaking was a generation upon whom great wrath came. Now, if you understand the verse, it's very clear that I'm going to read to you. You'll see this. In Matthew 23, look at verse 34. Well, let's go back up. 32. Matthew 23, let's start at verse 32. Fill ye up then the measure of your fathers. Now, do you understand what that's saying, congregation? He's saying your measure of your fathers, they sinned. They kept sinning, they kept sinning, they kept filling up their sin, they kept filling up their sin. Now there's some more to fill up. This generation filled it up because they killed his own son. That was the fullness. Now it was the day of wrath to come upon them. And that's what he goes on to tell. So verse 33, ye serpents, ye generation of vipers, how can you escape the damnation of hell? God judged them. He was sealing them. Wherefore, behold, I send unto you prophets and wise men and scribes. Some of them ye shall kill and crucify. And some of them shall ye scourge in your synagogues and persecute them from city to city. Now verse 35, very important verse. That upon you, that generation to whom he's speaking, upon the nation of Israel, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias, son of Barachias, whom you slew between the temple and the altar. Now look at verse 36. Verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation. The generation to whom he was speaking has nothing to do with the future. He was talking about that generation. That's why he gave the signs. He said, you'll be persecuted from city. You'll be persecuted and brought before councils. He told that in the other chapter. He said, so when you're persecuted in one city, flee to the other. Now we're here in Matthew. Go back to chapter 10. And look what he says here. And this is very important because this is where we have to understand the language in its context. Look at Matthew chapter 10. And look at verse 23. Matthew 10 and verse 23. But when they persecute you in this city, flee ye into another. For verily I say unto you, ye shall not have gone over the cities of Israel till the Son of Man be come. He's not talking about the second coming. That means those people would still be over there 2,000 years old wandering around in the cities of Israel. He was talking to actual people, Christians, their generation. He said, they're going to persecute you, so you flee to another city. But before you have opportunity to flee of all the major cities of Israel, he said, I'll be back. But he's not talking about the second coming. He's talking about coming and destroying Jerusalem. The coming of power, not the visible coming of Christ, but coming in destruction upon Jerusalem. As I said, he said, I will destroy their cities, their city. You see? And so this puts a time prophecy, that generation. Matter of fact, he said the gospel will be preached. And we read to you in Colossians 1:6 and 1:23 tells us that the gospel went into all the world. So he was giving them a time frame. We just read, this generation shall not pass away till all of these things be fulfilled in regard to the destruction of Jerusalem. Everyone understand this, you see? Now, go back and look at this contrast in Mark now. Go back to Mark 13. Because we read of signs and of the specific sign, the armies about the city. That's a specific sign that you can see and you can know. Jesus told them when. He said, when shall these be and what's the sign? He said it's going to be in this generation. And the sign is that you'll see the armies compass about the city. That's the key thing. Now, he said some extra things, but that's the bare bones. But now look in contrast to Mark 13 and verse 32. Mark 13, verse 32. But of that day. Now, what is the word but? It is a contrasting conjunction. What is he contrasting? He is contrasting the destruction of Jerusalem that had a definite sign, and they knew when. Because when they saw the armies compass the city, they knew the desolation was standing there and that they were going to be destroyed. So he contrasts the second coming in verse 32. But of that day and that hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels which are in heaven, neither the Son of Man. Now, why would they ask him when the destruction of Jerusalem was going to be if he didn't know? That wouldn't make any sense. They asked him, when will these things be? Did Jesus say, I don't know? I don't know. No, he told them when it would be. But now when they ask about the second coming, he said, only the Father knows. Now he gives some general admonition, and we'll find in other places in the Bible, they give general characteristics of the age. Paul reveals a little more material. But nowhere is there given a definite sign. Some people tried to get in 1948 when Israel was reconstituted a nation. Well, that's the sign. When you see the budding of the fig tree. The only problem, Luke's account says in all trees. Compare the Gospels whenever you read something. He was just talking about trees. He talked about a fig tree in Matthew. And Luke, who is a Gentile, he said all trees. He's just giving a sign. That did not mean anything as far as a definite sign of the Lord's return. But there were those that wrote books. You probably read one or heard of it. He'll be back. First it was 40 years. Then it was 60 years. Then it was 80 years. And now how many years are we since that? You see, that was not a sign of the Lord's return, any kind of definite sign. Now, it's part in God's plan of redemption, the unfolding of his rule. Obviously, God has some reason for that. But it was not a sign of his second coming. There is no definite sign. Look what we just read. Look at it again. But of that day and that hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, neither the Son of Man, but the Father. So take ye heed, watch, and pray, for you know not when the time is. People say, oh, that just means when the hour is, when the day is. Well, the word time isn't hour. It isn't day. It's season. In other words, you don't know. I don't know. Jesus didn't even know. He did as touching his deity, but as touching his humanity, he did not have that knowledge, and the Father's will was not to give him that knowledge. And so look what it goes on to say in verse 34, or verse 33. Take heed, watch, and pray, for you know not when the time is. For the Son of Man is as a man taking a far journey, who left his house and gave authority to his servants, and to every man his work, and commanded the porter to watch. What did he do? Jesus established his church. You can see it good there. He set pastors over the church to watch. And then look at verse 30. Watch ye therefore, for you know not when the master of the house cometh, at even, or at midnight, or at cock-crowing, or in the morning. Now I shared with you, in the Jewish watch there were 3 watches of the night. But in the Roman watch there were 4. It was from 6 in the evening to 9, from 9 to 12, from 12 to 3 in the morning, and from 3 in the morning to 6. So basically he's talking about the time from his first coming to his second coming as one day, divided into the first, second, third, or fourth watch. And so we don't know. That's what he's saying. As far as Jesus knew, he could have come in the first watch. As you understand, it's touching his humanity. Obviously, it's touching that he's God manifest in the flesh, but it was not the will of the Father for him to access that knowledge. So as speaking as the Son of Man, as far as he knew when he was teaching them, he could come in the first watch. He could come in the second watch. He could come in the third watch. He could come in the fourth watch. So what did he say? Watch. Be ready. That's the main admonition you find concerning the second coming. There is no definite, unique sign. Now, the Bible does say characteristics. You know, in the book of Thessalonians, and I haven't covered any of my outline, but in the book of Thessalonians, Paul taught the second coming of Christ. Man, they were so excited, some of them started quitting their jobs. They ended up becoming busybodies because the Lord didn't return and they didn't have any food to eat. And that's where he had to tell them, if a man doesn't work, he doesn't eat. And they were going from house to house and sponging off of people when they should have been working. And there was maybe even some false letters that possibly went around. He said concerning some that say they're writing from us. He said, don't believe them. He said, there first will come a falling away. Now that was a general sign. In other words, the Lord taught that there would be a falling away. And so he kind of calmed them a little bit. Now the falling away was not a distinct sign that at that particular time Christ was coming, but he was just saying that there would be a falling away before Christ came. And it happened, people. And it's as clear as anything. You go back in history, and in the Roman Empire, they worshipped Roman deities. And then 311, in the Edict of Milan, the emperor said that he granted toleration to Christianity. And in 365, that emperor said, the religion of the Roman Empire is Christianity. Where do you think in Catholicism they get all the saints and all of the names? It comes from the pagan gods of Rome. And so basically, Christianity apostatized. Remember, they went out from us because they were not of us. If they had been of us, they would have remained. They went out, and when Rome fell, the void of power was picked up by the hierarchy, which eventually developed the Roman Catholicism and Christianity. There was a departing, an apostasy. But that in of itself did not tell when the Lord was coming. He just said that you were going to have an apostasy before the Lord returns. And so this is what we need to understand. And so when you read in this, you read a distinct contrast. When you see, but of that day and hour we know not. You see the contrast. That's what I want you to see. That's what we need to understand. That's the one of the main points of the message. Now, trying to figure out where to go back into my outline here. Let's go back into chapter 13. Let's look here at the difficult verses. And here's the difficult verses. Chapter 13, beginning at verse 24. But in those days, after that tribulation, now what is that tribulation? The destruction of Jerusalem. The sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then shall he send his angels, and shall gather together the elect from the four winds, from the uttermost part of the earth unto the uttermost part of heaven. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. Like I said, Luke says all trees. When her branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is near. So ye in like manner, when ye shall see these things come, ye know that it is nigh, even at the doors. Verse 30, verily I say unto you that this generation shall not pass till all things, these things be done. Now here's the difficulty. In verses 24, 25, and 26, it appears that he is talking about the actual second coming of Jesus Christ. But in the parable, he then ends that all these things will come upon this generation. Because of that, there are some expositors that say that this is apocalyptic language describing the destruction of Jerusalem. But I don't believe that. For one reason, he says after. Now, in the other accounts, that's not emphasized. But here, if you look at verse 24, but in those days after that tribulation. Now, we have to understand about this sun being darkened. In other words, I believe this is talking about the second coming of Christ, and then that these verses about the parable are verses that's what we call an interlude, because he says in these, he says in verse 29, so ye in like manner when you shall see these things. Well, these things that you see is referring to the destruction of Jerusalem, not of the second coming of Christ. So he's going back to the destruction of Jerusalem. But what he is saying is that after Jerusalem is destroyed, we enter into what's called the time of the Gentiles. The gospel goes into the world. That is described, we'll read it in Luke in just a second, as a shaking of the nations. It is described in the book of Revelation as a shaking of the nations. And they are shaken until the Lord comes back, which is the final shaking of the nations. And the only thing that cannot be shaken is the eternal kingdom of God. And we go into the eternal kingdom of God. So read again and follow with me. Read again verse 25 of chapter 13. And the stars of the heavens shall fall, and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken. Okay? Now, go with me to Luke 21. You say, Brian, you're going to a lot of passages, and this is kind of confusing. Well, welcome to the Bible. All these passages are written on the same subject. Now, you can hear some exciting prophetic guy pull something all out of context and say a bunch of stuff that seems to make sense. The only problem is it doesn't arise from the Bible. They just read it into the Bible. The present day, they say the 70th week hasn't come. Now, would God give a week of 70, a prophecy of 70 weeks, and stop it after the 69th and start it again in the future? If I tell you I'm going to see you in 7 days, and I come 3 weeks later, and I say, well, didn't you realize after the 6th day I stopped my clock and I'm starting it now again? So I'm here in 7 days. You know when the 70th week came? It came after the 69th. And it says that Jesus, it said he would confirm the covenant, and he would, in the midst of the week, he had a 3.5-year ministry. He confirmed the covenant. He caused the sacrifice and oblation to cease. And he then talks about the overspreading of the abomination being determined, and Jesus did all of that. And he told him, he said, don't weep for me, weep for your children, because all these things are coming on this generation. And he pronounced the judgment upon Jerusalem. He said, your house is left unto you desolate. But look at chapter 21. The reason I'm showing you is he shows this shaking of the nations as a continual work. So we read part of it in Luke 21. We read about the destruction that came upon the Jews, upon the land. Let's read that again, verse 23 of Luke 21. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. For there shall be great distress in the land of Judea. Wrath upon this people, not upon the world. They shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So now they have been judged. God has ceased working through them as a theocracy. The gospel's gone to the Gentiles. Now look at what he says in verse 25. And there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, and the seas and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing from them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the cloud with power and glory. So now, even though it mentions the word signs, it's not a distinct sign. He is saying that when God turned to the Gentiles, he is pouring out judgments upon the nations. And we see that in the book of Revelation. He destroys a third of this, a third of that. He pours out judgments. And he's shaking the nations. And that shaking will culminate in the second coming of Christ. You see? And I'll read a passage that explains that. So here he speaks of it as a process. So when he shook the nations, first of all, shaking in that he ceased working with the nation of Israel as a theocracy, he turned to the Gentiles, and now during this time period, he is shaking everything that can be shaken. And then ultimately, the Lord will appear, and there will be that ultimate shaking of the heavens and earth, and we'll go into a new heavens and earth, the eternal kingdom. Let me show you how this works by going to the book of Hebrews chapter 12. Go to Hebrews chapter 12, verses 27 and 28. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 27 and 28. And this word, well, we have to go back. Let's go to verse 25. Hebrews 12, verse 25. See that ye refuse not him that speaketh. For they escape not who refused him that spake on earth. Meaning, what happened to the nation of Israel, to whom he spoke to on earth? Much more shall we not escape, we Gentiles, the world, if we turn away from him that speaks from heaven, because now he's in heaven. Whose voice then shook the earth, talking about in the Old Testament when he shook Mount Sinai. But now he hath promised, saying, Yet once more I shake not the earth only, but also heaven. So that's what Luke is talking about. That's what, although Mark is dealing with the ultimate shaking in Christ's coming, but that's what he's saying. We are in this process in which Christ as Lord is shaking the heavens and earth. Okay? And this word yet once more signified the removing of those things that are shaken, as of things that are made, that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. Wherefore we, receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire. And so the point is that what he is saying in Mark is that there was a visible sign that in their generation, what God had written concerning the prophecies of judgment upon the nation, the destruction of their temple and their city would come in their generation. The visible sign would be the Roman armies compassing the city. When you see them flee, because God graciously, providentially shortened the days. He said, Ye that endure to the end shall be saved, but God shortened things. And Vespasian went back. He didn't destroy Jerusalem. 2 years later, Titus came, but all the Christians had fled to Pella. They had fled to Perea, a city called Pella. And then he destroyed Jerusalem. Josephus, you could read the Jewish historian. Matter of fact, Josephus quotes Daniel, the prophecy of the abomination of desolation. The Jewish historian in the first century, he was there. He saw it. He wrote about it. And he said it was the fulfillment of Daniel. We read that the other week. I don't have it in this outline. But he said that it is obvious that God knows and controls all things. And so that was the destruction of Jerusalem. But of that day and that hour knows no man. Now we can see the signs of the shaking of the nations. We can see the general signs. But there is no distinct sign. That's why he said, watch. Go with me. I guess we got time to read this. Go with me to Luke, or Matthew 24. Let's do this. Matthew Let me see where I want to read here. Matthew 24. I'm sorry. Go to Matthew 24. Forgive. I'm not on my outline. That's what I'm trying to figure out here. Matthew 24, verse 36. Matthew 24, verse 36. Now, he's describing the second coming. Now, here's my point. As we read this, ask yourself, what is the visible sign? What is the unique sign? Or is there none? Look at Matthew 24, and beginning with me at verse 36. But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating, drinking, marrying, and given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark. Now, he's not talking about how sinful they were. They were sinful, but eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage is not necessarily sinful. Lord willing, we're having a wedding this coming Saturday. We'll be eating and drinking, and our granddaughter will be marrying, but it's not necessarily anything sinful. He's saying life will be going on as it goes on. People will be eating, they'll drinking, they'll be marrying and giving in marriage, and they'll know not until the flood came. You see, look at verse 39. And they knew not until the flood came and took them all away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Then shall two be in the field, the one shall be taken, the other left. Two women shall be grinding at the mill, the other shall be taken, the other left. Watch, therefore, for you know not the hour that your Lord cometh. Left for what? Left for judgment. The Bible does teach a rapture. The Lord will come. He'll bring the spirits of those that are with him. He'll resurrect their bodies. The living will change, and together they'll come up and meet the Lord in the air. And those that are still upon the earth will be left for judgment. But we do not know the time. That's what he's saying. While you're there, go over to Luke 17. Look at Luke 17, and we'll close with this. Luke 17, verses 28 through 30. Luke 17, 28 through 30. Luke 17 and verse 28, likewise also as it was in the days of Lot. They did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built it. Now he's not talking about their sin. They were sinful, but he's saying they were living their lives. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man be revealed. So he's saying there is no distinct sign for the second coming. There was a distinct sign for the destruction of Jerusalem. The destruction of Jerusalem happened in that generation. This generation, all the judgment of God for their sins will come upon them in this generation. You see, but of that day, even the Son of Man does not know. He could come in the first watch, the second watch, the third watch, or the fourth watch. He is presently, since that time, shaking the heavens, and the ultimate shaking will be in the coming of Jesus Christ. The only thing that will remain is the eternal kingdom of God, and a new heavens and new earth will be created. I hope that made some sense, okay? It's a little difficult, but let's all... Brother Buddy, come, and we'll close in singing a couple of verses of song. If you'll stand with us, please.